As mentioned in the invitation and the RSVP form and the follow-up reminders, this orientation will be recorded. So if you do not want to be in the recording, you are free to turn off your camera. You're also free to turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen. But it will be recorded and it will be posted later online for viewing after the orientation. In addition, if you really don't want to be recorded or whatnot, you are free to leave if you would like. Of course, we would love for you to stay and stick around, but because it will be recorded, you should not be missing out on any of the information that we share during this orientation. In addition, we recently found out that we unfortunately are not able to record the breakout rooms due to the Zoom settings. So if there was a breakout room topic that you're very interested in, you will have to attend that live. If you do want to change the breakout topics that you want to join, please make sure to send a message to Eileen Trang. She's working on the back end right now to get everyone set up with their breakout rooms for later on this morning. So any questions, always feel free to either raise your hand or send a chat directly to any of the hosts. So with that, we'll move on to our welcome. So Kevin, I invite you to also introduce yourself and welcome everyone to our orientation today.
All right, well, thank you, Julianne, and thank you all for attending the orientation today, and welcome to the returning section leaders, and also a special welcome to the new section leaders. Thank you all for stepping up to lead your section in service of the organization. And I just wanted to kick this off today by saying thank you. A thank you to the sections and to all your members for the service you provide to the organization. As you know, sections are partners in promoting the WSBA's mission, which is to serve the public and the members of the bar and to ensure the integrity of the legal profession and to champion justice. And the sections perform that role in a lot of ways, but section members generally comprise a little over 40% of our total active membership and are some of the most invested and involved members of the bar, and particularly section leaders who step up to lead their sections. So again, thank you for that. In addition to the networking and mentoring and educational programs that are provided, sections also comprise about half of the WSBA CLE portfolio. And I say that because the substantive area of law that is taught within our education portfolio, our continuing education portfolio, is done in full by the sections. So sections programs are responsible for all of our substantive educational programming that we deliver to members, which directly ensures the competence of the bar in their substantive practice areas. These are also some of the most well-attended programs and in-demand programs delivered by WSBA CLE. And so all of the services, I say this to really put a fine point on the fact that all of the services provided by the sections to their members and to the WSBA members, including the CLEs, further the WSBA's mission of serving our members and through them ensuring the competence of the profession to better serve the public. So I just want to say thank you again for your partnership and for your invaluable contributions to our organization. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julianne to go over our agenda and discuss next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And yes, I echo that. Thank you all to section leaders and the Board of Governors and other WSBA leadership who are present today. Sections are a vital part of the organization, and we could not do a lot of the work that we accomplish at the bar without you. With that, before I get into the agenda, I will go over some housekeeping items so that we make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what to expect for today. So as I mentioned, this meeting will be recorded. If you did not hear the earlier announcement this morning, if you could sign in with your name, rename yourself, and add your section name next to you so we know who you are and which sections you represent. on the back end. If you're unable to do that, that's okay. Staff on the back end will be working to rename folks so that we know. Because we do have a very full morning, we will not be able to go through individual introductions at this time. So please, it is imperative for us to know who's joining on the participant list and who is participating today. If you're joining by Zoom, which I think most people are from what I see here, we do ask that you stay on mute unless you are asking a question or presenting. It looks like most people are on mute at this time. Also, if you would like to speak or have a question, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom, or you can also use the chat feature. If you are joining by phone, to raise your hand, you'll have to hit *9. And then if you're trying to mute yourself on phone, it's *6. But for everyone who is here today, it looks like for the most part, everyone is using the Zoom application. So if you don't mind testing out that raise hand feature so that we all know that people are familiar with that, that would be great. In order to raise your hand, actually, as a host, I cannot see how to raise hand, but okay, we do have some people raising their hands right now. Great, excellent, wonderful. It should be a feature that next to your name in the participant list, you should be able to select raise hand, and that will raise your hand. Again, if that doesn't work for you or you can't raise your hand, feel free to use the chat feature. Hopefully you can see that there, and you can put your questions in the chat for everybody. With that, I'll go ahead and go over the agenda. If people do have any questions, feel free to, or having trouble right now, I know some people are raising their hands. I don't know if I should call on them, but feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you're still having technical difficulties. All right, so you all should have received a copy of the agenda, which was sent in the original invitation, as well as the reminder emails that were sent out yesterday. We're first going to start with a broad overview of the bar. For some of you who have maybe attended this in the past, this may be a refresher, but of course we do have new leadership. So while a refresher, it may be something different. So please stay tuned and pay attention to that opening overview, as we do have President Cicchetti and Interim Executive Director Nevitt here to present on that. Then we'll hear from our General Counsel on important items that all section leaders need to be aware of, which are bylaws, General Rule 12, open meetings, record retention, and contracts. Followed by that will be a presentation from our equity and justice team on diversity, inclusion, and equity in the legal profession. And then we'll kind of wrap it up before we move into the breakout sessions with important fiscal policies and expense processes that you should all be aware of, and our calendar for the year as it pertains to the sections program. Then we'll be moving into breakout sessions. 1 and 2, you should have, when you submitted your RSVP, signed up for specific breakout sessions. Those will cover everything from WSBA CLE and sections, mini CLEs, event planning, member recruitment. So thank you to the section leaders who have also volunteered to help facilitate and share their experiences during those breakout sessions. We're really looking forward to hearing from everybody on that. And Eileen is messaging in the chat breakout sessions. And then after breakout session 2, we're immediately going to adjourn. There's no plan to come back as a group. However, staff will hang around. So if you're interested in talking to staff more or each other more, we will keep the Zoom room open for a few minutes after the end of the orientation for us to continue the dialogue if you're interested. So with that, I do see a couple hands raised still. I'm going to call on those folks just to make sure that they don't have any questions. Sart, did you have any questions or anything to add? Nope. All right, hands down. So I'm assuming no questions. With that, I will pass it back to Kevin for the next slide.
All right, thank you, Julianne. And I realize I failed to introduce myself when I spoke the first time. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Kevin Platchey, and I'm the Director of Advancement here at the Bar. And the Advancement Department is the department where we deliver many of our member services and benefits. So within the advancement department is our CLE program, our member services and engagement program, our diversity, equity, and inclusion, equity and justice program. And so these are the teams that are comprised within the advancement department. And a large part of that department also is the administration of sections. So you're a part, the administration of the sections is a part of advancement as well. So that gives you some context about the advancement department and an introduction of myself. So the next thing we have for you is a video, a short video that was curated by the Washington State Bar Association entitled A Volunteer's Introduction to the Washington State Bar Association. And it's a short video that will provide some high-level information about the bar and your vital role in serving as a volunteer. So we'll play the video, and then on the other side of it, we will hear from our president, Kyle Schicchetti, and our interim executive director, Tara Nevitt. Thanks.
Group of active, committed volunteers. Hi, I'm Kyle Schicchetti, president of the Washington State Bar Association. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining a large group of active, committed volunteers who give their time to advance the legal profession in Washington State. The bar's mission is to serve the public and the members, to ensure the integrity of the legal profession, and to champion justice. I take great pride in being a member of this profession and a leader in this community of dedicated and hardworking bar volunteers. Thank you for your service, and again, welcome.
Hello, my name is Tara Nevitt, and I am the Executive Director of the Washington State Bar Association. Thank you for serving as a volunteer with the bar. This video will give you a brief overview of the bar, including its history, its values, and functions, followed most importantly with how you, a valued volunteer, contribute to the mission. The bar was formed in 1888 as a volunteer professional association for attorneys in Washington State. As the profession grew, in 1933, the Washington State Legislature established the bar as an agency of the state to regulate the practice of law. Currently operating under the delegated authority of the Washington Supreme Court, the bar is the mandatory regulatory agency and professional association for over 40,000 legal professionals in Washington, including lawyers, limited license legal technicians, and limited practice officers. General Rule 12.1 sets out the purpose of the bar and specifies its authorized activities. The bar operates within a set of core values which pervade all of its committees, councils, boards, and other activities. To serve the public and our members and to promote justice, the bar community values trust and respect between and among board, staff, volunteers, members, and the public, open and effective communication, individual responsibility, initiative and creativity, teamwork and cooperation, ethical and moral principles, quality customer service with member and public focus, confidentiality where required, diversity and inclusion, organizational history, knowledge, and context, and open exchanges of information. These values provide a framework for the organization, which draws on the skills and experiences of over 1,200 volunteers and 140 staff to pursue its mission each year. I have worked directly with many volunteers during my time here at the bar and have seen firsthand the impact of your service. Thank you, and I look forward to working together.
What does the bar do? The bar administers the practice of law in Washington State from your entry into the profession to your retirement. The discipline system protects the public by ensuring that licensed legal professionals are acting ethically. To help members be successful, we offer continuing legal education, practice management resources, an ethics line, and help with personal and professional well-being. The bar works to improve the legal system by working with the legislature to make changes to state law or by making recommendations to the court to change its rules and systems. The bar believes the legal profession can better serve a diverse public when it is itself diverse and inclusive. The bar values equity, diversity, and inclusion in staff, programming, and volunteers. Now, how does all this work get done? Quite simply, volunteer work is imperative to a thriving, vibrant, and engaged Washington State Bar Association. Volunteers serve in various roles, such as creating sample pro bono guidelines, writing an article, designing a CLE seminar, or grading the bar exam. Whether the volunteer position was created by the court, the Board of Governors, or for a specific project, these roles and many more are vital to fulfilling the bar's mission. An important relationship nestled behind the bar's many events, meetings, conferences, and publications is that of volunteer and staff. Volunteers work with staff liaisons who facilitate, collaborate, and act as a primary point of contact. This is an important partnership that is collegial and respectful. During your orientation, you will learn what your specific liaison's role is and how the relationship is designed for optimal success given the body of work. Staff provide skills and expertise that, when paired with volunteer knowledge, leadership, and advocacy, make for an exciting and effective match. Our highly committed volunteers give their time and time again, to advance the profession through upholding the ideals of self-regulation, education, community, access to justice, inclusion, and equity. Thank you for joining the WSBA volunteer community. Your participation is greatly valued, your perspective is important, and your time is priceless. We look forward to working with you.
All right, well, great video featuring cameos from our interim executive director Nevitt and President Cicchetti. So with that, I would like to invite President Cicchetti and interim executive director Nevitt to provide us with an overview and updates.
Thank you, Manager Knight. Kyle Cicchetti. I'm just recently sworn in, maybe a little over a month ago, the 2021 president. Looking at that video, a little behind this information, we filmed at least my portion of it earlier this year. We're about 2 or 3 months into the pandemic at that time, and said, "Hey, do you want a little video? You can go over, in your dining room, or you can do it up in the offices." And I jumped at to get my dining room and head up to Seattle. We did 2 of apparently did the we were all social distance requirement and making sure everybody was when it's interesting looking back now at some of these photographs that how we used to meet, how we used to gather, and hopefully if or anybody else gets together with their vaccines sometime in 2021, we can start to do that, because it really is better to get together in person and meet and mingle and socialize and get to know each other than these Zoom meetings that we've all gotten used to over the course of the last several months. Wanted to echo Director Placci's comments about volunteering. I've volunteered perhaps in the last 20 years or so, or maybe a little bit longer, for the Bar Association in one capacity or another, through committees or programs, and now more recently as the District 3 Governor for Southwest Washington, and now as the President. And one of the first things that I do get to do as President, which will be this next Friday and Saturday, is to recognize and send a message of gratitude to all of our volunteers. We have more than 1,000 volunteers who give of their time, experience, and talents, which we're eternally grateful for, and that includes the 29 sections. So my first things is to talk a little bit about that at this coming Board of Governors meeting and introduce a message of gratitude. So that will be coming up later this week. I think Tara and I, our responsibility today is to give kind of a 30,000 foot level description of the Bar Association, our efforts, what we see coming this year. It's an exciting year. It's a different year. We're all going to be working much differently than what we anticipated when we ran for the presidency and or when I began my volunteer work with the governors, Board of Governors. So you know, it's a test on how well we can pivot and change to the changes in society and our restrictions. Hopefully we can pivot again next year when the vaccine is available and we can gather again, as I said. But it's an interesting time. It's a challenging time. It's a challenging time for everyone, and we get that. But hopefully working together, we can get through this pandemic. We can move forward into the new year. A little bit later, I'll be talking about some exciting new things that the WSBA and the Board of Governors is doing. And I'm hoping that many of you will not only like what we're doing, but also volunteer your time for a couple of initiatives that I think are going to help the association and the bar well into the future. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So with that, I will turn it over to Executive Director Nevitt.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, it's nice to see so many new names, folks that I haven't had the chance to meet yet, and also some folks that I have had lots of opportunities to chat with over the years. I've been the executive director since I stepped in as the interim in April of 2019, and I've been with the bar for just about 6 years now. My vision for the bar is that it's an institution that is respected and widely appreciated by both the public and the members. And I really think that we get there by being collaborative, transparent, and accountable. As section leaders, I hope that you can help us get there by collaborating with us, asking hard questions, and holding us accountable as we step into the future. The really great innovation about this video is that it's done a lot of the heavy lifting of describing an overview of the bar, but we will go over some of it today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I really see sections fitting into the big picture of the bar. As you probably know, the Bar Association is what's known as an integrated bar, and there are many different models of bar association across the country. In the West, the integrated bar is the primary model. And what I mean by integrated is that not only do we regulate the profession through delegated authority of the Supreme Court, and we do that by administering the bar exam, the character and fitness process, and discipline, but we also provide support to members. Our name is the Washington State Bar Association. And that word association really speaks to that part of our mission that is about supporting members. Now, I think having an integrated bar creates a lot of interesting challenges, and it also brings a lot of strength to the organization. When I have gotten the opportunity to talk to members around the state, many folks that I talk to feel or want to feel like they are a part of something. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you create a sense of belonging and community when you are 40,000 strong? I think it's incredibly difficult. And this is really one of the ways that I see sections playing a key role. Sections really provide that sense of community. And in many, many ways, they help us to further our mission. Not only by providing a place where people feel like they can belong, but by providing really targeted education. Many sections also, in addition to educating members, many sections also have programs that benefit the public, programs that educate the public, charitable giving programs. So in many, many ways, sections are crucial, I think, to the success of the Bar Association. Right now, almost 10,000 members belong to sections. What if it was 20,000 or 30,000? I think we might feel even more connected if we could achieve that goal. Could we go to the next slide, please? And can I go to the next slide? All right, so this is the Bar Association's mission. And I think right away at the mission statement, it points out some of the tension that can arise in a integrated bar. So I think of the mission as having three key parts. The first is to serve the public and the members of the bar. The second is to ensure the integrity of the legal profession. And the third is to champion justice. Now that first prong is where I think is where most of the tension exists. How do we as an organization serve both the public and the members of the bar? And I think over the years, we've had a lot of debate and dialogue about it. I like to imagine that there doesn't have to be tension in that first prong. And the way that I think about us carrying out that mission is that we do serve the public directly, largely through regulating the practice of law. But in addition to that, we always serve the members in furtherance of serving the public. In other words, we serve the members so that they may serve the public. So unlike other voluntary organizations where most of our programs might be focused on drawing people in, soliciting their membership, we really try to focus on those programs and benefits and educational components that will help members be better legal professionals and be able to better serve the public. And that's how I think we try to pull off that first part of the mission. Kyle?
I would just like to echo that. I've never really understood the tension with regard to our mission statement. It is a very good mission statement. Some people tend to want to put say the public is more important than the members. Other folks think the members are more important than the public. I've never understand. It's not a ranking order. We serve the public and the members of the bar. In many ways, we serve the public through the members of the bar. And I think it's a great statement. We mess around with it every once in a while, but I think the bare bones of it is, we're there to serve the members and the public, and we do that with integrity and to champion justice. Championing justice is hard to say a little bit, but other than that, it's a great mission, and I don't know how long we've had it, but we've always about changing it, improving it, and the underlying thoughts that go into it have never changed, or really it's the same backbone that we've always had.
Let's go to the next slide, please. And I think Kyle's going to talk a little bit about the board's strategic planning work this year.
Yeah, so this is the exciting part. When I was ramping up as president-elect to figure out what I was going to do with my term, I had a lot of different ideas, and most of those ideas were traveling around the different parts of the state and talking with members and getting to know them and getting ideas, because in the last few years, a lot of our ideas on how to improve the Bar Association were from the members themselves in the small towns and communities around the state. And of course, things have changed, and we can't do that except through Zoom, which again is a poor substitute for gathering and meeting and getting to know people. But one of the ideas that we've had last, and Tara and I've talked a lot of this over the summer, is that the WSBA has lacked a long-term strategic goal for some time. And in fact, when we were trying to figure out how to launch this, we tried to find strategic goals in the past, long-term strategic goals. We couldn't find any. We couldn't, and of course our research is a little limited now, so we went back through the last 20 years or so, and there was just no initiative to do that. We're looking at a lease, I think, that ends in 2026, is it, Tara?
Yeah.
And so we're in downtown Seattle right now, and maybe that's not where we need to be in 10 or 20 years. Maybe there's a better location or a different model. So the Board of Governors decided to create a long-range strategic planning committee that would start to look at these issues. We had our first brainstorming session at our September meeting, and these goals were the initial gut reaction to what should be for considering the future of the bar. And these are all very, as you know, very good goals. I won't read them to you, but they are, come from much of the mission that we already have operated under for many years, and upon it a little bit for purposes of what we want to do long term. I think this living, breathing document that will change. And one thing that I'd like to see is goal 6, not only promoting a culture that will attract and retain employees, but also volunteers. That's how all of our members engage with the Bar Association. That's how they become not only involved, ingrained, and motivated and interested. So I'd like to improve upon that. Some of the things that we're looking at for the long range committee is, as I said, location of the bar's office. Perhaps that's somewhere outside of expensive downtown Seattle. Maybe that's a building, maybe that's satellite offices around the state. People have different ideas about what we would do best, how we would best operate, how we would best communicate and connect with those folks from all over our state. So those discussions are happening. Also, perhaps a better look or a more a careful look at the program that we offer. I was a little shocked as I was coming on board as president to learn that our attorney assistance programs are not what they once were. And from other bars that I'm a part of, I know there are very strong member wellness programs in other states that provide a very, very important program or system for our members to help them in times of crisis. And I'd like to see something along those lines to bolster. There's been some very important studies in the last 4 or 5 years with regard to mental health crisis and substance abuse that suggest that attorneys not only are more apt to have those problems, but also in need of services that are tailored to lawyers or attorneys. And right now we don't really have that. And I'd like to see that as part of our long-term goals. I'd also like to see, as part of that tour around the state a couple of years ago, one of our members brought the idea of bringing back fee arbitration for our membership. We don't have that anymore. We used to have a robust fee arbitration program. And again, as I've seen in other bars, that program itself helps reduce bar complaints and bigger issues. So I'd like to look at that. So these are the bones of this are there in the goals 1 through 6. Where the rubber hits the road is the technical and physical and specific ideas, a couple of which I mentioned. And we go forward. This will be staffed by many of the board of governors, sitting board of governors and officers now, but I invite all of you as well. These will all be public meetings. There'll be an opportunity for public comment. Participation. I've already been hearing from folks who are excited about this opportunity as we explore what we look like in 10, 15, 20, maybe even years. I think it's a groundbreaking strategic I hope by the end of this next year, we'll have something concrete, something that has been well vetted throughout the state, and something that we can implement and start moving toward, so that we have some structure over the course of the next 10 or 20 years. So, and Executive Director Nevitt, if you have anything to add, I'd appreciate your thoughts too.
Yeah, I would just add, I know that the board is very, very interested in getting input from members of the organization on, what the goals should be, what the areas of focus should be. The board did this brainstorming at its September board retreat, and now it'll be going to the long range planning committee that President Cicchetti mentioned. So I think it's going to be somewhat of a long process. Maybe by the end of the year, we'll have some long range goals. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to engage and provide input, and I really encourage you to do so. And I think our last part of the slide, we'll talk a little bit about how you can engage with the board. So could we go to the next slide, please? So the next two slides are, again, just sort of focusing on the big picture of the bar. I think it can be interesting to look at the numbers. We talk about the bar being 40,000 strong, and that is true, but not all of our members are active members. And so the active membership is closer to 33,500. And that includes lawyers. It's predominantly lawyers, but it also includes limited license legal technicians and limited practice officers. The next number I want to draw your attention to is 827. Those are our volunteers that are engaged on sort of an ongoing basis in our entities primarily, including section leaders. But we often talk about having well over 1,000 volunteers, and that's because we also have folks who who write articles, who teach CLEs, and although they're not volunteering on an ongoing basis, their work is equally as important to moving forward the mission of the Bar Association. I mentioned earlier that almost 10,000 of our members are a member of a section, so that's almost a third of our active members. And in addition to that, almost 7,000 of our members meet the definition of a new or a young lawyer. Next slide, please. So this is one of the many charts that we use to describe the organization. This one is called the entity chart. The Bar Association is a complex organization. I think about it as that proverbial elephant where folks engaging with one part can have a very different sense of what the organization is. This chart attempts to frame up some of that complexity by looking at the various entities that make up the Bar Association. So on the right-hand side, you have all of the entities that have been created by the Board of Governors. And actually you have the Board of Governors itself. And then below that, you have committees of the board. So Budget and Audit Committee, the Executive Committee, the Personnel Committee. And then you also have WSBA committees. And these have all been created by the board and to some extent report to the board. So that would be the Continuing Legal Education Committee, Court Rules and Procedures, the Professional Ethics Committee. And in addition to that, we have the 29 sections and the Council on Public Defense. And those are all entities that have been created by the Board of Governors at some point. We also have a little dotted line down there to the Bar Foundation. The Bar Foundation is another unique entity. It's a completely separate organization. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, but it is wholly controlled by the Bar Association. And by that, I mean that the trustees of the Bar Foundation are appointed by the Board of Governors, and the Board of Governors constitute the members of the foundation. And the foundation raises money to support WSBA's access to justice, diversity, inclusion, and public service work. On the left-hand side are the entities that report directly to the Supreme Court and primarily perform regulatory functions, although not exclusively. So, and these come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. The first box are the boards that are created by the court, and their members are appointed by the court. So an example of that would be the Access to Justice Board. Another example would be the Limited License Legal Technician Board. Below that are court-created boards where the Board of Governors appoint the members. And so the Law Clerk Board would be an example of that. The Character and Fitness Board is another example of that. And then lastly, we have other entities that just don't fit in any of the boxes, but they perform a regulatory function. An example is the Disciplinary Selection Panel and the Discipline Advisory Roundtable. All right, we're zeroing in on the last slide, please. And I think President Schicchetti is going to talk a little bit about the role of Board of Governor liaisons to sections.
Every year, the president-elect, as he transitions in the presidency, he or she has the obligation to appoint liaisons to not only sections, but also committee boards. And this year, I did my best to try to reach out to the 14 governors. We've got one that's onboarding, so there's actually 13 right now, but there will be 14 soon. And so for those 14 individuals, I've seen in the past that sometimes presidents have assigned folks to sections or committees where there's no connection, no interest. And sometimes that becomes, a failure waiting to happen, because sometimes, with all of the different obligations governors have, and they're usually 8 to 12 assignments. And that's a lot of work in addition to preparing for Board of Governors meetings. So this year, I reached out to all of them in the beginning, asking what most motivates you, what most interests you, what do you want to do, and tried to match up those governors with the sections, the committees, the boards that they want to participate in. They want to reach out. They want to consider these issues and work with the sections. So hopefully all of the section leaders and the sections will see, Board of Governors who will be engaged. They are your teammates for coordinating with the Board of Governors. They are all wonderful people that have devoted a significant amount of their own time to volunteer for the Bar Association. And I'm eternally grateful, because the president can't be all places at all times, but the Board of Governors, through 14 individuals, can do a lot of that. So I do to reach out to them. I think the assignments are all on our website, so you can find out who your liaison is. They should be reaching out to you as well. While we can't always attend every meeting just because there's so many of them. They do their best to attend as many meetings as they can. They do their best to try to reach out to leadership and to the members to make sure that they can answer questions, or they can update the sections on what the Bar Association is doing. And in turn, they're also expected to come to the Board of Governors meeting and report back on all of your activities. So again, it's a teamwork approach. And if there's any questions about what the Bar Association is doing, please reach out to them. I've done what I can over the last couple years to make the Board of Governors more approachable, more access to the sections, committees, boards. I think that's better for the organization as a whole. I hope you'll see that through your governor liaisons. But you can also contact me directly too at any time. My email is on it was posted in my last article. It's also on the web directory. I invite you to contact me directly if there's anything that I can do to help or to facilitate better partnership liaisons.
Kyle, I noted there was a question in the chat wondering how frequently the Strategic Planning Committee will be meeting and whether they should expect to receive notices for those meetings by email, or whether they'll need to check the WISBA website for that information.
It was, yeah, and the meeting schedule has not been set yet. I imagine it's going to be shortly, probably in November or December. I'm anticipating that it might be a monthly meeting, maybe a little more often with Zoom, maybe a little less often once we start to gather again. But I would say monthly. And it will certainly be on our website, the schedule and agenda, so you can look for that. We'll probably also set up some kind of email. We'll work with our staff, WSBA staff, to see if we can get a list together to send out announcements to interested individuals.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say follow up with your staff liaison, and for sure, I think we can either arrange to push out a meeting schedule to the section leaders listserv, or if the better approach is for individuals who are interested to get put onto a distribution list, I'm sure we can do that. So last little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about how sections can bring matters to the Board of Governors, and there are lots of different reasons why you might want to do this. Changes to your bylaws would be one reason, and we have one bylaw change on the agenda for later this week with the Board of Governors. In addition, sometimes sections want to develop resources for the public and or legal professionals Those are things that would go to the board for approval. Sometimes sections want to comment on external policies like court rules. Those are things that go to the Board of Governors. And in addition, oftentimes sections would like to comment and propose changes to internal policies, like the Bar Association's fiscal policies or a legislative comment policy, which was revised last year based on section feedback. Now, the board early last year adopted a policy regarding requests for them to act. One thing I want to clarify is that as a WSBA entity, sections are not required to follow that policy. That policy is really for external folks. But I do think it sets a very good roadmap for the steps you might want to take when you're bringing something to the board. And ultimately, the goal of that policy is to make sure that the board has the information it needs to make a really good decision. So the first step in the policy is to determine whether or not the proposed activity is permissible under General Rule 12.2. That's always sort of a threshold question that we need to ask. It's a good idea to check in with your staff liaison, and often they will reach out and connect you with our Office of General Counsel to help you work through that analysis. Once we've determined that it's permissible under GR 12.2, the next step is to do a really solid analysis of the proposal. And again, the idea being to make sure that the board has the information it needs to make a good decision. So in addition to the substantive aspects of the proposal, it's also important to understand whether or not there's any fiscal impact, what other stakeholders or groups might be impacted, and to solicit their input, to determine whether it complies with any relevant rules, and to think through all the different implementation implications. Your staff liaison can be incredibly helpful in working through this analysis. And as Kyle said, your board liaison can be really helpful in sort of understanding what might be of interest to the board and sort of the larger context of what the board is focusing on. In addition to pushing things to the board, if you really want to be able to influence the organization, it's really helpful to stay engaged on an ongoing basis. Although we are always looking to identify who are the key stakeholders and to push out opportunities for comment and take note, there's really no substitute, I think, for having an ongoing presence and an ongoing dialogue. A couple of ways that I think you can do this. The first sort of lower impact way is to really get to know your board liaison and really educate them about what are the issues that matter to your sections, and basically just really help them to be a good liaison between your section and the Board of Governors. Lastly, oops, sorry, I'm getting an alert on my computer that's covering up my notes. Another option that's a little more high impact is to appoint someone to attend the board meetings, to review the materials. They generally come out the Friday before a board meeting, and then attend any relevant section. Now that we're doing everything over Zoom, I think it's easier than ever to engage. And I really think that having sort of a constant presence that's tracking what's going on, the various timelines, is really the best way to really be involved in influencing the direction of the organization. And we are about 5 minutes over our time. I thought I'd quickly check and see if there's any final questions, or if President Cicchetti wanted to make any final comments.
Nothing further from me. I appreciate all of the response and participation today, and the opportunity to be able to tell you a little bit about the strategic long-range planning, and I hope to hear from all of you as we move forward in that endeavor.
Yeah, and just one final thank you for your time here today, and also every day as you work to lead your section.
Thank you, President Cicchetti and Interim Executive Director Nevitt. I want to, before we move into this next section, mention, I apologize if I didn't make it clear earlier, we are also sending out a copy of the materials. So not only will you be able to access the recording, you will also have a copy of the PowerPoint slides and any additional resources and materials that we're talking about today during the orientation emailed to you after. So if you're frantically taking notes, I apologize, you'll have it, but later on afterwards. And we will also be scheduling a break for hopefully around 10:30. So if you can stick around, great. If not, and you got to, do what you have to do in between, that's also acceptable. So with that, I would now like to introduce our General Counsel, Julie Shanklin, to talk about some General Counsel items.
Good morning. I'm Julie Shanklin. So before we launch into the slides, which we'll do in just a minute, I do want to emphasize that the Office of General Counsel is here to support you in your role as section leaders and to make clear that we're not intending a one-way flow of information. I know many of you have been in these positions in the past, and I want to just make very clear that if something comes from our office and you think, what is that? I don't understand that. I have questions about that. I have better ideas about that. We want to hear those things. There is no intention of a one-way flow. And I think that that getting a two-way flow is easier in real personal contact. And so I just want to really encourage you to contact us if you don't understand something or have questions. Kevin and Julianne and Aline are just fabulous resources for you and have lots of information, and they will know where to find us if you can't find us. But again, we are actually interested in hearing what you have to say. I have, over the past several months, had several really interesting conversations with section leaders, and I really value those conversations. And the last comment before we launch into the slides is, because time is limited today, this is a very high level overview. I am happy to answer individual questions offline. Julianne and Aline can likely do the same. So if we get to the end and you don't have all of your questions answered, please, let's just take them offline. Okay, so we can go to the slides. The first slide is about WSBA public records. I think there are a lot of slides about public records, so we won't sort of spend a lot of time on these. The high level details here are, we have a general rule, 12.4. A lot of rules about the Bar Association are in the 12s, General Rule 12. Our public records rule presumes public access, and it applies to WSBA and the subgroups, which include the sections. We are not subject to the Public Records Act or FOIA. Before General Rule 12.4 existed, the bylaws had a rule that also presumed public access. We actually have a public records officer and a records request procedure, and that information is published on our website. You are welcome to refer people to that if they would like to request records. Next slide. So why does this matter to you? This matters because section records that meet the definition of bar records are subject to disclosure, and that includes emails. That includes those emails that you might have written after you had a conversation with somebody and you were pretty irritated and you just let it all hang out in your email. It includes any kind of written communication with WSBA staff or records that you give to us because we're required to store them. If you don't work at a public records agency, sometimes it's just kind of a different way of thinking that kind of everything you do is happening in public, because transparency is important, and that is the rule of the day, and you just need to keep it in mind. I think we have some tips later on. So next slide. So this is the technical definition and scope of bar records. You can read the definition there on the screen. It's very broad. It's basically anything that is used by and possessed by WSBA or its staff, including under the control of our facilities or servers. And writing, as you can see, is something that has been recorded, essentially. in any format. Next slide. So this is our quick little internal, very quick questions that we run through to determine it's a bar record if it contains any information relating to the conduct of the bar function, and it's prepared, owned, used, or retained by the bar, and it's in the possession of the WSBA and its staff or stored under bar ownership and control. The next slide is if it's not a bar record. So that would be a record that's prepared by a member of a section who's not a WSBA employee. If the record is solely in that person's possession, is not sent to us, it's a record that the bar would not have to create and not currently in our possession at the time of a records request. So your own personal notes are not bar records unless you send them to a bar employee and then they become a bar record. Next slide. So there are a lot of exemptions. Not all bar records are subject to disclosure. The details of this, there's a lot of details, and I'm noting that in the slides, there's a lot of detail in the notes. Sort of the most frequent exemptions that we see are for information that is made confidential by court rules, or information that includes, personal information that is not included, that is allowed to be exempted. But again, I am happy to answer more detailed questions about this offline if you have more questions about it. Next slide. Email best practice. This is not necessarily aimed at sections or even volunteers. I think this is probably aimed at many people now that we're all in the remote world, and many things we do are recorded. So if you're going to email WSBA, one thing to think about is don't mix business and personal content in a single email itself or email thread. We may not be able to exempt your personal information from disclosure. And is the email the appropriate medium for your communication? There are lots of different ways to communicate, including email, in-person, telephone, all the things that you can think about. What we often tell people is if you have a concern about your email being in tomorrow's headlines, maybe you should reconsider either your communication choice or the content of your email. Next slide. Oh, here we go. Sorry. These are our email best practices, mostly internal. I see there's a question in the chat. I don't know, Julianne, would you prefer that I finish my presentation and then take questions, or what works for you?
Whatever you prefer, Julie. I think my recommendation would be wait till the end. And then if we have to take it offline, Mel or anyone else that has any questions, we can answer them after the orientation.
Okay, let's do that then. But I definitely want to make sure that we do answer questions because I appreciate the questions. So this just sort of explains our internal process for who is required to keep emails for the retention period described in our records retention schedule. And I think the takeaway here is it is not the section member's job to retain these emails. It is WSBA's job, and we do it according to our adopted schedule. Next slide. So this is moving on to a short discussion about GR12. So there are several sections to GR12. There's actually a GR12 just with no number after it. There's GR12.1, which is the regulatory objectives. There's GR12.2, which is the purposes, authorized activities, and basically prohibited activities of the bar. So what you see here is a bit of an excerpt from the WSBA purposes and specifically authorized activities, which include sponsoring and maintaining committees, sections, and divisions whose activities further the bar's purposes, and to maintain a legislative presence to inform members of new and proposed laws and to inform public officials about bar positions and concerns. I think those are probably the two purposes or authorized activities that will relate to your job as section leaders the most. Next slide. This will be the bane of your existence, probably. I know it feels that way to folks. And I have to say that this is also the subject of some of my most interesting conversation with section leaders, and I enjoy those conversations. So GR 12.2C lists the activities that are not authorized by WSBA. So these, I think, relate to the comments that Tara Nevitt made earlier about WSBA being an integrated bar. So if you think about that, you know, compelled license fees, et cetera. So WSBA is not, and you are part of WSBA, so WSBA is not allowed, not authorized to by the court, take positions on issues concerning the politics or social positions of foreign nations, take positions on political or social issues which do not relate to or affect the practice of law or the administration of justice, or support or oppose in an election candidates for public office. And obviously, every single word in that rule is just crystal clear, and there's no gray area there, right? So that's what leads to the wonderful conversations. We do require sections to do GR 12 analyses in certain circumstances. And so I, you know, offline and in the legislative training that's coming later, we can discuss further advice that we have for you about how to conduct those analyses. Maybe this is the place to interject, you know, why this would apply to you. I note that there were no slides about the bylaws, so let's just take a slight pause and point out that the WSBA bylaws are on the website. They do change periodically, so I think it's important to go to the WSBA website and make sure that you have the most updated version. And if you have any questions about that, I'm sure that Julianne and Aline can assist you with that. But section 11 of the bylaws probably is this, the sections article. And I'm just going to read to you two very brief sections. I'll read to you 11A and 11E. And I think that's really the part that you need to focus on for this presentation. So Article 11A says sections are entities of the bar created and tasked to carry on the work of the bar and further their purposes as defined in individual section bylaws. A list of all current sections will be maintained by the executive director. Once established, a section will continue until discontinued as provided in these bylaws or in the section's bylaws. And then E, sections are subject to all bar bylaws, policies, and procedures. Each section must have bylaws consistent with the bar bylaws. Amendments to section bylaws may be made by a majority vote of the voting executive committee members or by a majority vote of section members present at a section meeting. Section bylaws or amendments thereof will become effective when approved by the BOG. So, you know, clearly the bylaws indicate that sections are an entity of the bar, so therefore GR 12 also applies to sections. Next slide. So WSBA has had a comment policy for a long time, and earlier this year, I believe, the Board of Governors adopted a new policy for sections only. We're going to go through these slides in a minute, but the two changes, for those of you who've done this before, and I actually didn't look at the list, but I thought I saw many people who have a lot of experience with this. The two changes that I saw really were, there is an additional step for sections that are going to testify or take a position on legislation, and that involves notifying Sanjay and allowing him some time to provide advice, and allowing him some time to determine, what, if anything, what if other entities are commenting on the same matter, or maybe even testifying on the same matter, and determine whether there are any issues there. And then the sections are allowed to do certain things without conducting a GR12 analysis. And we'll get to that in the slides, but I just wanted to highlight for you, those are the two major differences that I see when I look at the old policy and the new policy. So comment policy, the definition of comment means to take a position, so express support, concern, opposition, even if you don't do that with a statement explaining your position, and also to provide input, to suggest changes, recommendations, or analysis without taking a position. That's all included in the word comment. Next slide. So sections are authorized to appear before or publicly comment on legislation, state legislation, or publicly comment on state proposed rule changes, court rules, upon certain conditions. And the next slide. So these are new slides. I tried to make this clear, and I welcome your input if it's not clear. But this slide, I'm hoping, represents when the Board of Governors authorization is required before a section makes a comment, testifies, or takes a position in any municipal matters. So anything about a city or county. In the list of federal matters there, positions that are opposite or opposed to board positions, and any position on behalf of all of WSBA as opposed to just your section. All of those require prior authorization of the Board of Governors. Next slide. So if your section is going to appear a person before or comment to the legislature or the legislative committee, there are essentially 3 steps. A 75% vote of the voting members of your executive committee determines that the matter is authorized by GR12. 75% vote of your executive committee voting members agree with whatever the substance of the comment is that you'd like to make. And you must seek authorization from the Legislative Affairs Manager, Sanjay, and follow advice that you receive. Next slide. I apologize for going through this so fast. And again, I welcome offline questions, but I want to make sure we get through all of the information in today's meeting. So if you're going to support or oppose legislation, there are a few additional steps in the new policy. So 24 hours before you're going to testify at a legislative hearing, the section must notify the Legislative Affairs Manager and wait for a response before testifying. Notify it's supposed to be the Legislative Affairs Manager and the chair of the Leg Committee of decisions on pending legislation with your reasons. This is the section should do this as soon as possible. And sections are responsible for keeping the Legislative Affairs Manager up to date and following the advice received. Just briefly, I think the purpose of this, again, is to just try and make sure that there aren't any surprises, especially when entities might be taking opposing positions. Next slide. So this is something that is new in the new policy. Sections can point out ambiguities like, RCW citation errors, conflicts in case law or RCW citations, provided the legislative affairs manager is copied on the communication or advised in a timely manner. And the policy says that these technical comments do not require a GR12 analysis. Next slide. So OGC can provide additional services as well. Bylaw amendments. OGC is welcome to assist with reviewing and drafting section bylaws if you would like that. We can assist with guiding you through the BOG approval process if that's necessary. Julianne and Aline are also very, very good resources for this. Contract review, your contracts, our WSBA contracts signed by WSBA and go through our normal contract review process. That also means that you, especially through Eileen and Julianne here, can ask questions, and have access to our contract advice if that's what you would like. We review newsletters, and I have heard in the past that some of you may not view this as a service. I really enjoy reading your newsletters and I enjoy the conversation. This gets into some of the GR12 issues. We sometimes have fabulous conversations about what is political, what is related to the administration of justice. It's a really fun part of the job. And then we can do other services that will assist you and are necessary. Next slide. Just very quickly, the WSBA bylaws require that your meetings are open. Any meeting of a bar entity at which action is contemplated must be open. And the definition of action is the transaction of official business, including but not limited to receipt of member information, deliberations, discussions, considerations, reviews, evaluations, and final actions. And I see final actions isn't here, but that's essentially, reaching consensus on a decision. So open and public, unless it's an executive session, means either in person or by video conference or teleconference. Can't really meet by email. It's pretty hard to determine, to make that open, and it's even interesting to determine whether you had a quorum by email. Your schedule and contact information for your meeting should be made reasonably available by the bar. Typically, that is going to be on our website. Minutes are recorded and open to public inspection, except for sub-entities. That requirement doesn't apply to them. No secret ballots generally. And there are specific reasons why you can have executive session. Those are listed in the bylaws. You cannot exclude bar staff or your BOG liaison from those executive sessions. And again, I'm happy to address questions offline or at the end. I mean, probably at the end of the whole presentation. Yes, Julianne, are we still behind?
We are kind of at time right now. And we do have 3 questions in the chat, or at least 3, one of which I think Eileen is answering. I think maybe if we could take just 1 minute to answer those, Julie, that might be helpful. And then again, if we do have any other questions, we can also maybe, post some of those FAQs or whatnot to the entire group if they're interested or whatnot. So Mel's question from ADR is about their meetings, and does it mean that their Zoom meetings should be recorded and maintained as a public record, or are the minutes the only public record and made so because we copy our bar liaison on those minutes?
Okay, I'm just trying to read through it. There's no requirement to record meetings. The minutes are all that's required by the bylaws. In fact, I think recording sometimes inhibits meetings. This one is this question specifically about executive committee meetings? I think.
It is.
Yes, so section executive committee meetings. Sorry, I'm really having a hard time reading the chat comments. But yes, I believe that those are public meetings. And if you disagree with me, let's have a conversation and I will look more closely into the bylaws. But so I think the answer would be yes, those require notice, and no, they don't need to be recorded. Eileen and Julianne, jump in if you disagree.
I guess maybe a follow-up question to that is, if they do record though, what does that recording then become a bar record that needs to be made public?
Yes.
And then of course, Mel, we can also connect offline if that didn't answer your question. And Gwynn from Solo and Small Practice had a question about our listserv posts subject to public access.
If you mean public records request, I believe the answer is probably yes. I would have to actually really analyze that and think through where they're stored, but I believe they are probably stored on what would be determined to be a WSBA server. And I believe they are part of WSBA business. So yes, I would say listserv posts are subject to public records requests.
All right, and the last question is about section newsletters. So there's a question from Brett Hill from Construction Law, which is, are you saying that section newsletters that have articles discussing cases or new statute needs to be reviewed by WSBA or Board of Governors first?
No, I must have been very unclear. I apologize for whatever I said that caused you to think that, but no. There is nothing about new statutes or discussing new statutes or discussing cases that needs to be, well, I think your whole newsletter is typically reviewed by OGC, which, as I said, I actually like, because I really like reading your newsletters. They're wonderful. They are absolutely packed with information and really interesting. But I think they do need to be reviewed by WSBA. I don't believe they need to be reviewed by the BOG. Oh, and I see Eileen has already answered that question. Sorry, Eileen.
All right, well, thank you, Julie, and thank you all. Again, if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out directly to Julie, myself, or Eileen, and we can connect offline if you're interested in more ways that General Counsel can support you all. So with that, we're moving on to our next presentation before we get into the break. Before I introduce the next speakers, I will ask for those joined by Zoom, Eileen may be trying to get a hold of you as we're trying to assign breakout room attendance. And so please check your chats or maybe email if she can't get a hold of you via chat to see if Eileen's asking which breakout room sessions you want to be a part of so that we can get you to the right breakout room. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Paige Hardy and Diana Singleton, who are members of our Equity and Justice team, to talk to you all about diversity, inclusion, and equity in the legal profession.
Hi, everybody. As Julianne mentioned, I'm Paige Hardy. I use they, them pronouns, and I am part of the Equity and Justice team. I'm an Equity and Justice lead here. I've been at the State Bar for about 2 years, and what I kind of handle is I do some of the DEI work, so the diversity, equity, and inclusion work, as well as the public service and moderate means programs. And then I'll let Diana introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Diana Singleton, and I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Paige and others on the Equity and Justice team. I'm the manager, and in addition to the diversity, equity, inclusion work and pro bono public service, we also do work around access to justice, working with the Access to Justice Board and the Council on Public Defense. So I am glad that the different types of work that we just described are in one team because they're all interrelated. So I wanted to just sort of kick us off in terms of how we hope to spend our next 15 minutes with you all. And it does seem a little weird because my screen, I could really only see the PowerPoint. So I'm staring into a screen knowing that you're all out there smiling and excited to hear about have this conversation. I think we're all in this new world where Zoom meetings and presentations are a little odd, but we're making do. And so, so the first thing I wanted to, well, I guess to back up a little bit. So Paige and I are hoping to spend the next 15 minutes talking to you about diversity, equity, inclusion. And rather than spend most of our time talking about, you know, what are the resources, which we will get to, we thought it would be a better use of our time just to center all of us on why are we even talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and why does it matter to the bar, and why does it matter to the legal profession? And I think oftentimes, maybe especially for lawyers, which I am one, is we often jump to the what or the how, instead of sort of stepping back of, you know, why are we, why is this important? Why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to the legal profession? So I think there's a number of different whys, and one which I didn't include a slide, but I know there was a slide earlier in your presentation when President Cicchetti and Executive Director Nevitt talked about the mission of the bar. And so to me, in my work that I do, that's always my why every day, is how can I help deliver on the mission? And I think similarly with the sections, that's probably your North Star, and from there, trickling down to your own section's mission. So that's probably the first why. And then otherwise, going to the next slide is going to the general rules, which I know Julie covered some of the general GR 12.2 sections. And then one of them is subsection 6, which specifically says that part of the SBA's activities should be to promote diversity and equality in the courts and the legal profession. So that's another a why for the work that we do, and the work that hopefully you all do is to be looking at that. And then I also thought it'd be helpful to share the next GR, which is really talking about the regulatory functions of the bar. Oftentimes, I think when people think of the bar, they think of member services and regulation, and kind of the two shall not meet. And maybe thinking about DI work is really just focused on member services. But the GR 12.1J tells us that even in our regulations, diversity and inclusion among us as legal services providers, and for freedom from discrimination for our clients' communities, that should also be our starting point. Another why is the bar strategic plan. And I know that President Cicchetti talked about, you can move to the next slide, talked about the BOGS process. They have a long range planning committee that they're in the process of creating an updated strategic plan, which does include diversity, equity, and inclusion. This that you see on the slide here is language from the past strategic plan, or I don't know if we could still call it current until we get our next one, but the gist is similar, which is to promote equitable conditions for members from historically marginalized or underrepresented backgrounds, to not only to enter a profession, to stay in the profession, but also to thrive in the profession. And oftentimes people might wonder, you know, when you hear the terms historically marginalized or underrepresented, you know, who are we talking about? What does that mean? I think it could mean lots of different people. There's lots of different ways you could think about that. But one way that I think is helpful is looking at this next slide, which is a snapshot of the underrepresented groups that the bar has data on that we ask members to, it's an optional question when you renew your license, but this is a way for us to understand who's in our profession. And as you could see with the red column, the bar members who are underrepresented as it relates to our general population in Washington, and then as it relates to the legal profession nationally. And then I thought it'd just be interesting for you to also see how the law schools are doing. And I actually just updated this slide with their entering class from this year, and it was actually really encouraging. The numbers made a significant jump for people of color for the law schools. So they're, I know, working really hard to make efforts to diversify their entering class and creating that pipeline into our profession. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is want to share a little bit about the bar's diversity and inclusion plan. So just a little context. So you'll see that it was approved in 2013. But before then, the bar had been making steps towards, living out those words that I just shared from the GR12 and the mission. And I think as far as I could tell from my historical research, it was in 2003 that the bar made a deliberate commitment to diversity. And then a year later, in 2007, they made a commitment to diversity, equality, and cultural understanding. And then in 2012, the bar committed resources to doing an extensive demographic study to really understand the makeup of our legal profession. And so part of the takeaway from that demographic study was the impetus for this plan, which the plan is available on the bar's website. And, I think the takeaway from this plan, or oftentimes people who are familiar with this plan refer to it as the inside out plan. And what's meant by that is when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion work, it's both inside, thinking about what you as a person that's part of an organization, part of a legal committee, and part of a system, how are we doing that work internally? Or another way you could flip it to say, how are we making sure not to perpetuate any kind of fill in the blank ism? And then on the, that's the inside. And in terms of the outside, it's thinking about going back to that GR 12.26 is how do we make sure that we're advancing DEI within our client communities, that we're not perpetuating anything harmful to our own clients. And one of the things that I had shared with the Board of Governors at their meeting a couple of months ago is, I think this plan is really helpful in helping us to think about how do we operationalize our commitments. But as you might imagine, a lot of things have changed since 2013, including more data and more stories, more importantly, of how different types of oppression are impacting the most marginalized client communities, but also our own members. And so I know that the diversity committee, which I work with, are looking to seeing how they could work towards updating this plan. So I think we're going to move on to the next Y, which I think Paige is going to take on talking about the Washington Race, Equity, and Justice Initiative.
Yeah, thanks so much, Diana. So one of the really exciting parts about, I think, working for WSBA is it's verbal commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion. And one of the ways that I think it really solidified that commitment was back in 2018, in March 2018, the Board of Governors signed on to what is called the Washington Race, Equity, and Justice Initiative, or we affectionately call it REGI, R-E-J-I. And what REGI really is it's a network of people, communities, as well as organizations that are deciding to collectively work with each other to push for racial fairness, for racial equity and justice in the law, in the profession, and in the justice systems which we work within. I'll have you move to the next slide, please. And one of the really, I think, amazing and incredible parts of RGGI is it outlines several acknowledgements and commitments that organizations that are signing on to RGGI are committing to as well. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through all of them, but I just want to point to one that I think is really important, which is acknowledgement number 6. And it reads for folks, because the text might be a little small, it says, true justice cannot be achieved until the legal and justice systems and all who work in these systems are conscious of and able to counter the impact of racialized systems, racialized structures, and bias. Doing so requires acknowledging that different groups are situated differently and intentional approach differently, and that targeted intentional approaches may be needed to reach just and equitable outcomes. And I think it's really a call for us to be working together as justice partners to push to change the systems and the policies that exist to marginalize and oppress people across the spectrum. And so I think this is one really neat way that we've kind of made that commitment to this work. I'll have you move to the next slide, please. And so another one that I think is really important is commitment number 7, which I think really frames the work that the equity and justice team is doing. And it's to ensure organizations invest in active ongoing learning that will teach us to see, reveal, and transform structures that create racialized outcomes and push members and push communities of color outside the circle of human concern. This commitment requires that we help members of our organizations and communities to actively and expressly challenge the use of racist language and behaviors, openly listen when we ourselves are being challenged, and learn techniques and tools for reducing and eliminating implicit and explicit bias. And I think this is a really concrete way that we can call upon ourselves to be doing this work collectively and individually. And it requires that we do some ongoing learning and are committed to dismantling those systems that continue to marginalize folks. I'll have you move to the next slide. And this is just a quick pull quote that comes from the Washington State Supreme Court letter that they wrote in June 2020 in response to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And what I think that's really remarkable is it's a call to action to all legal professionals that are working within our legal and justice systems to be doing the work. And I love that it calls for individual and collective actions. I'll have you move to the next slide. And I'll have Diana go over the triple pandemic image that's in front of you now.
Sure. This is, I think, just the last slide on us centering ourselves around the why. So, and just sort of to acknowledge the world that we live in now, that, you know, we are obviously all dealing with and talking about the COVID pandemic. But there's 2 other pandemics that I think are intertwined. And one is the pandemic of racism. And the other is the economic insecurity or the intractable poverty, and how they're all intertwined. And as we know, there's unfortunate stories and data around how COVID is disproportionately impacting not only people who experience poverty, but communities of color. And so I think it's just a helpful frame as we all, you all as sections, think about your work in how do we acknowledge the triple pandemic, and what can we do and leverage our resources and power to advance equity and justice. So we'll move on to the last piece, which are resources. So we've set the context, we've talked about the why, so now what? So I think Paige is going to just share with you in the last minute that we have some resources that we wanted to make sure you know about.
Thanks, Diana. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of our goals really this year is to kind of support sections and other WSBA entities by providing tools and resources that each of you can implement to do equity work more intentionally, as opposed to it being an afterthought or an add-on. And one of the tools that we want to offer is the Race, Equity, and Justice Initiative Organizational Toolkit. And it's a really comprehensive toolkit that outlines foundational concepts so that we can have shared language when it as it relates to race equity. It talks about preparing you to dive into doing equity work, and it also has this like phased out process that really allows for you to think concretely to implement race equity in the work that you're doing as an organization, as a section. And I think, you know, Diana put it well, it's like, how do we operationalize this work so that's foundational and a bedrock of the work that you're doing moving forward. And one great part of this particular toolkit that I want to draw your attention to is it has an assessment for the organization or the entity. And it can really be the first step that you use to assess, you know, where your organization is on the spectrum when talking about racial equity. And I think the thing that we really want to highlight for you all today is that DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion trainings are not enough. It's a very basic first step, and that equity really has to be built into the structures that we're working within. And so I really encourage you all to take a look as you're doing your strategic planning and planning out your year and years ahead to really think about how you can implement equity work in what you are doing. And I think this will take us to our last slide, but I just want to flag some additional resources for you all. Our team has developed 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion legal lunch boxes in collaboration with the CLE team and with the diversity committee. We also do educational programs and partnerships with the minority bar associations and also organizations like Just Lead Washington. This afternoon, we actually doing a CLE event with the Washington Attorneys with Disabilities Association. So if you're available at 3 p.m., I invite you to join that CLE or the reception afterwards at 4 p.m. And then another way we're supporting the DEI work internally is what we're providing consultations for staff members as well as volunteers on specific DEI issues that might arise with your section or committee. And then finally, what we're trying to do is to facilitate trainings and resources for staff so that they can be thought partners with each of you to develop more equity-focused practices. And I think that brings us to our last slide, which is just questions and comments.
All right, well, thank you, Diana and Paige. I don't see any hands right now, and looks like we are just a little bit behind schedule, but that's all right. We still have time to cover everything that we need to. So according to one of my clocks, it says it's 10:39 a.m. So I think now would be a good time to maybe break and come back no later than 10:50 for the rest of the presentation. I think we'll still be able to start the breakouts at 11 a.m. Before we leave, I do want to call out specifically someone who is joined by the phone. The area code that is appearing is 775, and the last 3 numbers are 395. If you would mind identifying yourself so that we know who you are, that would be great. And then we can put you in the proper breakout rooms when we come back. And if you're talking area code 775, last 3 digits 395, you may still be on mute.
Hi, 775 is Ann Gwynn.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Ann. We do also have you signed in to through the Zoom app, correct? Yes. All right, perfect. Thanks, Ann.
Okay.
All right, with that, let's go to break, and please be back by 10:50. All right, before we get into fiscal policies, I do want to make another announcement. We are still waiting to hear back from some folks about which breakout room sessions they want to be a part of. So again, please check the chat for messages from Eileen Trang to confirm which breakout sessions you will be attending. With that, I will now pass it off to our sections team members, Eileen Trang, our sections program specialist, and Carolyn McGregor, our sections program coordinator, to talk about our WSBA fiscal policies.
Hi, thanks, Julianne. I'm Carolyn McGregor, and just want to introduce you to the highlights of the fiscal policy. And I'm going to read through some of these, but I'd also like to point out that in the materials that we'll be sending you following the meeting, we have the excerpts of the WSBA fiscal policies that is relevant to sections. So these are the highlights, but a lot more detailed information is available in your materials. So with that, just an overall practice or a way of approaching your expenditure of funds is to think about it as being a steward of the funds that members contribute to make sections operate and function well. So with that in mind, just thinking about the ways that you can cut costs or keep costs low when you're planning your section events and operations. So WSBA does reimburse out-of-pocket expenses incurred in connection with WSBA business and meetings that are reasonable, necessary, and appropriately documented. So with that, we do require expense reports, itemized expense reports for all of the expenses that are not reimbursed by other sources outside of WSBA. And the expense report forms are available in the volunteer toolbox that's on the website. There'll be a link to that later on in this slide deck. And those reimbursements are available via check, or now you can have it done by direct deposit. There's also a form that's included in the volunteer toolbox and in the materials that you can fill if you don't want to receive a paper check, but would actually like direct deposit into your bank account. Especially now, we are having all of our meetings virtually, but when, and hopefully not an if, but a when things return to more normal times, even then we would hope that meetings that can happen virtually in terms of your planning work, that you would do so that way to help reduce costs. I'm going to hand it over to Eileen at this point.
So this, we just kind of want to put this out, this information out there for folks, even though, you know, basically air travel and travel in general is discouraged. And so I did want to mention that, you know, for airfare and for when you're just traveling in general, this kind of goes back to the idea of being stewards of your section funds, and just that we will only reimburse for coach or economy class and not first class, and we will also, you know, gauge whether or not it makes more sense for you to have flown or traveled by car. But a lot of this is also things that if there are any extenuating circumstances, we can also talk about it and work that out. So I think in general, for a lot of these expense policies and fiscal policies, a lot of it's just like, if there are any questions about it, check in with me. I can walk you through some of this stuff. I can also make sure that we talk about, you know, the per diems, or if when traveling is allowed again, we can talk about, you know, if you need a hotel in Seattle and you can't find one under the per diem, we can talk about how we can work through that. Next slide. So we were going to go through how to fill out an expense report, but since we are short on time, I'm just going to sort of like show you these slides. And if you ever want to sort of get this one-on-one tutorial, feel free to reach out to me and I can walk you through it. Our expense forms are not the most intuitive, so you know, feel free to reach out to me. Can you jump ahead to the affidavit? This is one thing I did want to point out though. So we do require detailed receipts, but we also understand that sometimes either you didn't get one from the hotel or restaurant, or you know, you've lost it or something like that. We do have a affidavit that you can sign, and it is up to $75 for that particular expense item. And that's it for for this presentation. There is a lot more to the fiscal policies and what is and is not reimbursable. As Carolyn mentioned, that is going to be part of your handout packet. But if you ever want to get a more detailed discussion on this, either reach out to me, or I can also present this at one of your executive committee's meetings as well, if you want that sort of tutorial. And again, this is a little bit weird to be talking about since most sections don't have a ton of expenses right now with the with COVID, and most of meetings are being virtual. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen and Carolyn. And again, I do recommend that for section leaders, especially if you're new and never filled out an expense report, or aren't familiar with the WSBA fiscal policies, to make sure and take a look at those. Similarly to the bar bylaws, the fiscal policies can be updated. And so even for those that have been around for a while, make sure to go to the volunteer toolbox and download the most updated recent fiscal policies. With that, we're going to go over a little bit of the calendar of events, and I will say that we do want to attend the breakout sessions at time. There will be a point between the breakout sessions where we will be coming back together as a group, so we'll be able to cover some more information if we're unable to do that before the breakouts, in between the breakout sessions. So with that, Carolyn, if you could go to the next slide, please. So here we kind of have a snapshot of this fiscal year 21. For those that may not be aware, the bar runs on a fiscal year that is October 1 to September 30th of every year. Fiscal year 21 is October 1, 2020 through September 30th, 2020. And currently section leadership terms start on the fiscal year as well. So that's important to note. It's also important to note that there's a difference between our fiscal year and our membership year / licensing year. As you may all be aware, since you are all WSBA members, the licensing year is on the calendar year, January 1 through December 31st. And so in addition to licensing, section member year is also on that calendar year. So with that, this slide is really kind of to give you an idea of what this year may look like, and things as section leaders that you should be aware of and keep an eye out as you are doing your planning for the year. It was mentioned earlier during Julie's presentation from General Counsel that there will be a legislative primer for those sections that are participating in our legislative process and comments. And that is scheduled for December 2nd. So I did want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Sanjay Wabkar, who is our legislative affairs manager, should have already sent invitations to those that are the liaisons between the sections and our legislative program. So you should have already received that email. If you did not, please let us know, and we can connect you with Sanjay to make sure that you're on that list. Other things that you should be aware of is the annual reports. So you should have received an email from me requesting your section to submit their 2020 annual report. Those are due on December 4th, so keep that in mind. And then section renewals, again, since section membership year is on the calendar year, it would be great if you all, would encourage your current section members to renew their section membership, in addition to potentially recruiting new members. Other points of note on this calendar that's worth noting are when the election cycle is for sections. So we will start that in February of 2021. And per the sections bylaws and the bar bylaws, the elections will occur, between, including application period, between March and June of the year. And so everything else on there is just kind of for your reference. Again, you'll get a copy of this after the meeting. Carolyn, it's 11 o'clock, so we can talk about the next slide later. Can you scroll to the breakout session slide really quick? So we do have breakout session 1 and 2. We will be breaking out at that point. Again, these breakout sessions are really meant for you all to discuss amongst yourselves, your best practices, maybe challenges that you've faced in these on these certain topics, as well as there will be staff present there to answer any questions you may have. So with that, we'll go ahead and break out into breakout rooms. If we haven't heard from you, and because we don't know what breakouts, we might just randomly assign you to a breakout room as well. So with that, after breakout room session 1, we'll come back. I'll cover some more items that on our FY21 at a glance presentation, and then we'll move into breakout session 2.
I'm opening the rooms now.
So yes, when you should receive a pop-up that says the host is inviting you to join a breakout room. Please make sure you just select join so that you can join those breakout rooms. And I'll see you again at 11:30. Provide in between. So I did want to mention, as it wasn't mentioned before, that thank you all for participating in this event today. If you weren't aware, everything that we discussed was discussed as at the request of those who completed the survey that we had submitted to the section leaders back in September about what you wanted to hear about. And so, you know, we hope that this was helpful for you. Carolyn, can you go back to a previous slide? And that really that you understand that this is just the beginning of ongoing dialogues, discussions, and connections, and that what we're hoping, one more, Carolyn, what we're hoping to accomplish is that this year, especially since, you know, we're not able to meet in person and we weren't able to have a full day orientation in the fall like we generally do, that what we're hoping to do is a lot of the feedback we received on that survey, we were not able to incorporate it in this orientation due to time constraints. And so be on the lookout for maybe future kind of sessions, 1-hour chats, if you will, over the year on other topics that you as section leaders indicated you'd like to hear more about. We may end up continuing some of those topics that we discussed today. And so feel free to reach out to myself, Eileen, or Carolyn afterwards if there's something that you think that as section leaders you'd like to talk about and would like us to help facilitate, and we will schedule some time throughout the year to, you know, have those opportunities to connect more and to really hear from each other about what we're working on, what are the best tips, what are some challenges, and maybe even collaborating more with each other. So with that, going back to my presentation regarding the fiscal year 21 at a glance, this slide is really meant to kind of understand how, if for whatever reason the section is bringing an item before the Board of Governors, what to keep in mind as far as timing. So in Interim Executive Director Nevitt and President Cicchetti's presentation, as well as referenced in Julie Shanklin's presentation, our General Counsel, they mentioned, you know, matters that go before the Board of Governors, which could include our bylaw amendments, you know, other items, comments on legislation, if you will. And so what I want to bring to mind is the Board of Governors meetings are posted online. So those are the dates are posted online for you to see. We've also linked to them in the slides that you'll get. And really, if you're planning to bring a matter before the Board of Governors, there are meeting deadlines and materials deadlines that you should be aware of that are also posted on that schedule. So I wanted to highlight that, you know, if you do have, let's say, bylaws amendments, you really should make sure to take a look at what the materials deadline is and bring the matter before your sections liaison, Eileen, as soon as you're even thinking about something. That way we can walk through the timeline and expectations. And with that, we'll move on to the last slide, Carolyn, which is our volunteer toolbox. So it was mentioned a few times throughout the presentation that you can find this on the Volunteer Toolbox. The Volunteer Toolbox is a web page that we host on WSBA.org, and that toolbox contains all the policies, the forms, the guidelines, processes that are for all of our volunteers. And so you'll find a copy of the bar bylaws on there. You'll find a copy of the videos that we shared with you today. You'll find the fiscal policies. You'll find expense reports. So the Volunteer Toolbox is really your repository for documented resources if you're looking for more information on any particular topics, as well as a copy of orientation materials and video recording. So with that, the breakout rooms are set. They are scheduled to go for about 30 minutes. So we might go a little past noon. If you have to leave, that's fine. If you want to stick around, feel free to do so. Again, we are officially ending the meeting after breakout room session 2. So you don't have to come back to the main session. You may leave if you'd like, or you can come back to the main room and hang out a little bit more. So with that, we are moving on to breakout session 2.
Carolyn, can you put me into the member recruitment breakout room? And also the recording is still going on, so you might want to pause that. Okay. Thank you. Stephen, do you? Okay.
Yeah, if you can put me in member recruitment as well, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.